So, have you ever just stopped and wondered, how did we get here? I mean, all of this. From small, scattered groups of people to this massive, interconnected global civilization. It's a huge story, right? One that's been in the making for literally millions of years. The story of how we built our modern world one essential block at a time. Let's dive in and see how it all came together.
All right, here's our game plan. First, we're going to look at how we created the basic blueprint for society. Then, we'll explore how we forged the big ideas that shape our minds. After that, we'll see how we built the huge networks that connect us, how we survived a great reset, and finally, how we bridge the entire world. It's going to be a whirlwind tour, so let's get right into it.
So this is the big question, isn't it? How did it all happen? This isn't just about memorizing dates and kings. Nope. It's about understanding the fundamental shifts, the game-changing ideas, and the massive projects that completely transformed humanity from the ground up.
Okay, our very first building block, and you could argue it's the most important one of all, was the agricultural revolution. This is the moment we decided to trade in our spears for plows, and in doing that, we completely changed what it even meant to be human.
You know, what's fascinating about this change is the trade-off. Sure, we got a steady supply of food, but we lost a lot too. Our hunter-gatherer ancestors, they were actually taller. They had a way more varied diet. The switch to farming cereals meant the average guy's height shrank from about 5'9" all the way down to 5'3". We went from being mobile nomads to being stuck on a piece of land. It was a huge, huge sacrifice, but it was the sacrifice that made pretty much everything else possible.
And that sacrifice paid off in incredible ways. See, with a stable food supply, not everybody had to be a farmer anymore. And that freed people up to become builders, engineers, priests, rulers, all the specialists who created these amazing new systems. We start seeing the first massive cities, like Uruk. We see these awe-inspiring structures like the pyramids. And we even get remarkably advanced engineering. I mean, the Indus Valley had toilets and drainage systems, but this also created rigid social pyramids, with a pharaoh at the very top and a huge population of laborers holding it all up from the bottom.
Well, when you have tens of thousands of people living crammed together, you're going to need some rules. And the Babylonian king Hammurabi gave us one of the first and most famous legal codes. It was, let's be honest, pretty harsh. An eye for an eye and all that. But it was also a revolutionary first step. For the first time, society was organized around a written code of law, not just whatever the most powerful person in the room felt like that day.
So let's move on to our next block. Once we had food figured out in some basic order, we suddenly had the luxury to ask bigger questions. Not just, how do we survive, but how should we live? This is the era where the great philosophies and ideas that still shape our world were forged. Over in Athens, this totally radical new idea started to take hold: democracy. Now look, it was far from perfect. Only a tiny fraction of the male population could actually vote. But the core principle, the idea that power should belong to the people, not to a single king, that was a revolutionary concept that would ignite movements for thousands of years.
At the same time, over in India, a prince named Siddhartha Gautama stepped outside his palace walls and was confronted with the reality of human suffering. His quest to find an answer led him to enlightenment, and he became the Buddha. His teachings offered a path to inner peace, a philosophy that looked inward to solve life's greatest challenges.
And then, in China, two powerful philosophies popped up to create a sense of balance. You had Confucianism, which basically answered the question, how should we all live together in society? And then you had Taoism, which answered, how should I live in harmony with the universe, famously symbolized by the yin and yang.
But not everyone was sold on democracy. The Greek philosopher Plato, for example, argued that governing was a skill, kind of like being a doctor. You wouldn't let everyone vote on how to perform surgery, right? So he proposed this idea of the philosopher king, a ruler chosen not for their power, but for their wisdom. And this set up a timeless debate that we are, believe it or not, still having today. Should power rest with the many or with the wise?
Okay, so we've got agriculture and we've got big ideas. The next building block is all about scale. This is the age of empires, of connecting huge territories and all kinds of different people into the largest networks the world had ever seen. And there is no better example of scale than the Roman Empire. I mean, just look at that. At its absolute peak, Rome controlled a territory stretching all the way from the chilly shores of Britain to the deserts of the Persian Gulf. They ruled over something like 50 to 90 million people. Just think about it. Managing all of that was a truly monumental feat.
So how in the world did they pull it off? Well, it boils down to three key things. First, their unstoppable military machine. The legions conquered and secured the territory. Second, their incredible engineering.
Roads, aqueducts, walls, they physically stitched the whole empire together. And third, and this was their masterstroke, they used Roman law and the promise of citizenship to slowly turn conquered enemies into loyal Romans. It gave people a reason to want to be part of the whole project.
And this massive network wasn't just political. All that stability gave rise to the first great international trade route, the legendary Silk Road. You had China making the silk, Rome desperately wanting to buy it, and the Parthian Empire right in the middle getting rich playing the middleman. For the first time in history, you had a flow of goods, ideas, and, even diseases connecting the great civilizations at opposite ends of the world.
All right, let's see how this all... Well, in this case, how it all falls apart. Because no network, no empire lasts forever. This next block is all about what happens when a great power collapses and new, world-changing forces rise up from the ashes.
This timeline just lays it all out so starkly. First, the Roman Empire splits in two. Then the whole western half completely collapses, leaving Europe in total chaos. And into that power vacuum, a powerful new unifying force explodes out of the Arabian Peninsula. After the death of the Prophet Muhammad, Islam begins an expansion that would create a brand new center of gravity in the world. And this is such a crucial point. While Western Europe was going through a period of, fragmentation and decline, the Islamic world was entering its golden age. In places like Baghdad's House of Wisdom, scholars weren't just saving ancient Greek knowledge, they were actively building on it, making incredible advances in math, medicine, and astronomy.
So, back in Europe, what was the response to this power vacuum? People had to go local. With no Roman army to protect them, they faced constant threats from groups like the Vikings. This led directly to feudalism, where regular people, the serfs, basically traded their freedom for the promise of protection from a local lord and his knights. It was a brutal, decentralized system that was born out of pure necessity.
And that brings us to our final block, where we see a world that had been broken apart start to reconnect, often very, very violently. This era of collision and rediscovery would bridge all the gaps and lay the direct foundations for our modern world. The first great reconnection came from a totally unexpected place, the Mongols. Under Genghis Khan, they used brutal conquest to forge the largest land empire in history. But here's the wild paradox. That same brutal conquest created a massive zone of stability. They revived the Silk Road, and people said you could walk from one end of their empire to the other in complete safety. It's just incredible.
And finally, we see Europe wake up. The fall of Constantinople sends a flood of scholars and ancient texts into Italy, sparking the Renaissance. Then Columbus accidentally connects two halves of the world that never knew the other existed. Art explodes with creativity, and Martin Luther challenges the religious order that had dominated Europe for 1,000 years. Suddenly, in just a few decades, everything, geography, art, religion was being radically transformed all at once. The world was changing, and it was changing fast.
So, when you put it all together, there you have it, the building blocks of our world. We started with the order that came from agriculture and law. Then we forged the ideas that define how we think. We built massive networks to connect us all. We survived the resets when those old systems fell apart. And finally, we forged new connections that brought the entire globe into one single, complicated story.
You see, each of these blocks built upon the last one. It's this long chain of cause and effect, of triumph and disaster. And it really makes you wonder, right? Looking at our world today, with all of our technology and our challenges, what's the next block of civilization that we're building right now?